2024 was an all-time year for music. It feels like almost every major artist dropped, and so many new artists came onto the scene. Every genre had a memorable album. It really feels like we're entering the peak of creativity in music, and it resulted in one of the best years of all time. So I decided to pick my 25 favorite albums from this year. She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She by Chelsea Wolfe is my number 25. It came out at the beginning of the year in February, but its goth-like darkness has stuck with me throughout the year. I never really got into Chelsea Wolfe before this album, but it made me go back and check out her whole discography, and I really just fell in love with her aesthetic. I'm a massive goth music fan. I'm an active listener of bands like Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, Killing Joke, and of course The Cure, and I can comfortably say that Chelsea Wolfe is the best modern goth artist. But weirdly enough, this album is one of her least goth releases. She gets very industrial and trippy on here, with some incredible standouts like House of Self-Undoing and Dusk. It's her most emotionally powerful release up until this point, and also has her strongest production. And of course, Chelsea kills the vocal performances. It's one of the darkest albums of the year, and that's why it's one of my favorites. Hit Me Hard and Soft is Billie's best album so far, but I don't think that will last for a long time. I've always been a fan, but this album has a sense of pure artistry to it that very few pop artists can match. How many pop artists can make an emotionally powerful song about loneliness and self-hatred, like The Greatest, and a comforting and beautiful song about a deep love for someone, like Birds of a Feather? How many artists can do that in general? The best part about this album is how genuine it feels. Whether she's discussing her sexuality or talking about her past mistakes, it feels like she means every bit of it, due to the deeply personal lyrics that make you feel a true connection to her. The choruses on this album are also endlessly catchy, with my favorite being Chihiro. The production on here also feels like a major step up, as does pretty much everything else.
360, when you're in the mirror, do you know what you see? When you're in the mirror, you're just looking at me.
2024 was one of the biggest years for pop music in recent memory, and no pop statement was as massive as Brat. As a Charli fan ever since Vroom Vroom, seeing her absolute explosion of popularity this year was incredibly satisfying, as it's so deserved. Brat's greatest quality is the pure aesthetic around it, even starting from the album cover and the title. Her ability to make party bangers like 360 and Von Dutch, and also get personal and emotional on tracks like Sympathy is a Knife and So I, is amazing. I think Charli handles her bangers and more emotional tracks both equally well, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I preferred the bops. I know some people are going to be upset this isn't even higher, but I don't think it's as consistent as albums like How I'm Feeling Now and Charli, and other ones you'll see on this list. Songs like I Might Say Something Stupid and Rewind are ones I rarely come back to as well. But this album is still great and was one of the most memorable music moments of the year.
Quarter brick of girly, cutting up a cookie on the sauce, storming on the dice.
Across the Tracks was my favorite Boldy James release this year. I know a lot of people prefer Penalty of Leadership, but I'm just not sold on Nicholas Craven's production yet, and Conductor Williams is just somebody I trust way more, as he always delivers. Pretty much every year, Boldy finds a way to make it on my year-end list. Something about his nonchalant and deadpan delivery just pulls me in. He's focused on every verse. There's no hook, so it allows for every track to flow into each other, as Boldy is strictly doing the only thing he knows how to do, and that's rap about being a gangster. Conductor also absolutely kills the production, which with my favorite beats being Terms and Conditions and Flying Trapeze Act. All 10 songs on here are tight, organized, and smooth as hell. It may not be as ambitious as previous Boldy releases like Manger on McNichols or Bo Jackson, but it works well for casual listening, as this was an album I had on repeat all year.
But I manipulated power as I lied to the masses. Died when my money gluttony was too attractive.
Kendrick Lamar had one of the greatest years for a rapper that I've ever witnessed. In terms of having a presence, Kendrick absolutely dominated, from his beef all the way up until his victory lap that was GNX. While I personally wasn't a fan of Not Like Us, or really any of the disses other than Meet the Grams, I still acknowledge that Kendrick had a historic year, and this album made it even better. I was skeptical when I heard it was coming with zero warning, but about 3 listens in, I realized I had nothing to worry about. While it did feel like a victory lap, Kendrick still gets really personal and heavy like he always does on songs like Man at the Garden and Reincarnated. He of course continues making bangers like the 2 SZA tracks, and my favorite, The Heart Part 6. It's a very versatile album, and he pretty much nails every part of it. Even though I haven't had as much time to digest it, I would still say this is my third favorite Kendrick album, behind Good Kid Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly. It had all the elements that a Kendrick album would have, but it also makes it a lot more fun to listen to. 13 Frank Beltrame Italian Stiletto with Bison horn grips is one of my absolute favorite experimental albums that came out this year, and one of my favorite titles. As someone that's never fully been able to get into Shushu, this one was something that I was very hesitant to try to listen to, but I immediately loved it as soon as I first heard it for one simple reason: it's just a lot more accessible. It still has the classic experimental factors that made Shushu so beloved, and it's definitely not playing it safe. But every song had a clear structure and was more traditional, which I thought made it really fun and a great starting point for their discography. My favorite songs from Shushu are all on here. The incredible production of Common Loon and the intense vocal performance of Beneficium make those my true highlights. But this entire album is gripping from start to finish, and I strongly recommend it for people who don't like experimental music that much, because I loved it as somebody with those opinions. Manning Fireworks is MJ Lenderman's most fun and mature album yet. I've been a big fan ever since his self-titled, which I still think is his best album, but this one really felt like MJ figured out his style as a songwriter, and he executed everything really well. He's a master at capturing that melancholic and depressing sound, similar to artists like Jason Molina. And while MJ will never reach the heights that Molina reached, I mean basically nobody does, he can still write one hell of a song. His lyrics took a big step up on here, straying from just songs purely about heartbreak, and creating unique stories explored on songs like She's Leaving You and Joker Lips. He's matured a lot throughout his short career, and I think he can do even better with some more polished production, which is the only flaw I have with this album. Overall, MJ is one of my favorite alternative artists right now, and this was a really solid release from him.
No doubt, I can tell you're acting your heart out.
Smile by Porter Robinson was one of my most anticipated albums of the year, and it absolutely delivered for me. I love the shit out of the singles, and of course Nurture is incredible. While I don't think this was as good, there's some absolutely incredible songs on here. Knock Yourself Out, Russian Roulette, and my favorite, Cheerleader, are all amazingly produced electric bangers that show Porter's ability to make emotional tracks through his relatable lyrics. But Porter really went in a lot of different directions on here, talking about his weird relationship with his audience on Cheerleader, and going in a more depressing and self-loathing route on songs like Easier to Love You and Is There Really No Happiness. The best part of this album is the production. Porter is one of the best current producers out there, and everything sounds so pretty and passionate. You can hear the effort Porter puts into his work on everything he makes, and that's why he's an artist that I love and look forward to his future work. But for now, I think I'm fine sitting on this album for a few years, because it gets better every time I hear it.
To where we're at, you gotta read between the lines. You see evil on the shore, you gotta keep them being kind.
Cold Visions is my favorite Blade album yet. I know Blade is going to stick out like a sore thumb on this list, but I really have grown to love his style over the past few years, and I think it's reached its peak on this album. Even though I'm not a big trap guy, he absolutely killed every trap beat on here, and the sadder emo rap songs that he always does are also great. You can really see how much he's matured on songs like Terrible Excellence and King Nothing, and my favorite track on the album has to be End of the Road Boys. It just goes so hard. The atmosphere this album creates is its best quality. It's so cold that it's hypnotizing. It almost feels like this album is the essential winter album that came out this year, even though it was made in April. I know it's a joke, but I really don't know how else to describe this album other than saying the vibes are immaculate. I seriously don't think I could ever get enough Blade and Young Lean. I've converted to Drain Gang, and I recommend you do as well, because they just keep popping out bangers. Where We've Been, Where We Go From Here by Freako was my biggest surprise of the year. They came out of nowhere with this debut in February, so near the beginning of the year, but everything on here sounds so polished and well made that you think this duo has been making music for years. If I were to have one complaint, it's that it often doesn't experiment as much as I would have liked, but as a major indie rock fan, especially the more melancholic and melodic stuff that is present throughout this album, I can't really have too many complaints. Songs like Crimson to Chrome and Get Numb to It are endlessly catchy with some absolutely killer production. And the opener, Where We've Been, was one of the most gripping opening songs of the year, and it made me immediately pay my full attention to what this band had to offer. While nothing reached the emotional highs of the opening track, every song hit the exact right notes that I wanted it to, and I think this band can make some amazing stuff in the future. I was debating whether to include Conlaswell by Maroha on this list, as it's technically just an EP, but I don't think my music listening experience would be complete without this release. Maroha is a post-punk band that infuses jazz elements into their music, and their ability to create pure intensity is second to none. Songs like The Invisible Man and Zeitgeist create such a thrilling atmosphere, and I don't think the sound they have established has gotten stale at all. They have only released 2 EPs, both of them being very short, with 4 songs on Knocknaria and 5 songs on this release, Conlaswell. I'm interested to see if this band can translate their passionate vocals and incredible production into a full-length album, and whenever they release it, I'm going to be waiting with incredibly high expectations. I would have placed this even higher if it was longer, but its barely 20-minute runtime sadly prevents me from placing it any higher. Chromacopia by Tyler was one of the biggest moments in mainstream music this year. It had an incredible and unique rollout, and Tyler once again proves his mastery of creating unique characters and styles for every album, but the music absolutely delivered as well. Songs like Sticky and Noid were ones that I wasn't too fond of after first release, but I ended up liking them more and more after every listen. Tyler's best quality is his ability to make everything grow on you with time. It happened with Flower Boy, Igor, and Call Me If You Get Lost, where I first didn't love it, and then they ended up as Album of the Year contenders every time. You can also throw Wolf in there as well. But of course, some of the tracks on here were undeniable on first listen, like Take Your Mask Off and Thought I Was Dead. His production is just phenomenal on every track, and he gets really introspective and personal with the songwriting, and it ultimately just shows that Tyler is one of the best artists out right now. I will put this at 4th in his discography, but I wouldn't be surprised if it finds its way in my top 3 in the future. The Love It Took to Leave You by Colin Stetson gets my vote for the most underrated album of the year. Seriously, more people need to talk about this thing. It has some of the coolest and most unique production of the year. As a massive dark ambient and drone fan, I knew I would love Colin Stetson's work, but this album feels like his best so far. It sounds so haunting and ominous. The atmosphere it creates is really as scary as it gets. If I were to describe this album with one word, it would be hypnotic. My first listen to this album was one of my most memorable listening experiences of the year. Songs like the title track and Malediction are sure to put you in a unique headspace, as I guarantee it will freak you out. And even if this album doesn't have the most replay value, it is still one of the most technically impressive and powerful albums that came out this year. 2024 was one of the best years for metal music in recent memory, and Absolutely Everywhere by Blood Incantation is one of the best metal releases of the year. Death metal albums are oftentimes very inaccessible for a lot of people, myself included, but this is one of the most colorful and fun death metal albums you will ever hear. I'd argue it started a whole genre, space metal. I don't know if that will stick, but it's what I associate songs like Stargate Tablet 1 and The Message Tablet 3. It's very progressive, as each song creates a unique atmosphere that eventually leads to some incredible vocal performances and guitar and drum work. The production on here is also just so ethereal. It really makes you feel like you're floating in space, but it's one of the most intense space experiences imaginable because it doesn't stray too much from its death metal roots. This is a true death metal epic. Alright, I'm not even going to pretend like I know how to pronounce my number 11. Muntau Tunja by Orensi Pazuzu is yet another metal entry, this time leaning more towards the black metal side. As a massive black metal fan and a big fan of this band's previous work, I knew I would absolutely love this album. This album's true strength is just how unique it is compared to other black metal albums, and just the entire band in general. It's not just pure despair, it adds many psychedelic elements to it, and creates some truly amazing atmospheres, especially on songs like Valotis and the title track. It's accessible for sure, but it also does so many different things that you would never think would work. and if you don't think it fits the first time, you're bound to love it the more you listen to it. The production on here is just incredible, and the vocals are so full of emotion and passion, it makes it impossible to look away. There's never a dull moment, and its heavy and dense atmosphere will disturb you, as it does get pretty spooky sounding. I just love chaotic and experimental black metal like this, and if you do too, then I guarantee you'll love this thing.
Only brother crack, ain't writing gems, the type with ends, then they run it back. Nah, P, why they call it heat, it's just a running track.
The Thief Next to Jesus is Ka's best and final album. I've been a Ka fan as soon as I first heard his music. I absolutely love his laid-back style over some truly incredible drumless beats, but what makes him stick out is his ability to write about his struggles living in poverty in a way that feels like poetry. This album is some of Ka's most passionate stuff, with songs like Bread, Wine, Body, Blood, and Beautiful having some of his best performances. It's an album that focuses a lot on Ka's relationship with Christianity, which makes it stick out from his previous releases, as Ka focuses on this topic in such a powerful way. I also think the beats on this album are Ka's best, maybe rivaled by Honor Killed the Samurai, but really I think the production on this album is next level. It's perfect music to relax to, but it's equally perfect music to make you think and feel what Ka was feeling during his life, as this is his heaviest and darkest album. Rest in peace, Ka. I would go out on a limb and say that Cutting the Throat of God is one of the best death metal albums of all time. It's definitely the best metal release this year, but I'd put it on a bigger scale. The production on this album is unbelievable. Like, everything sounds so polished and dense. Every single track has such punch to it that it will get the attention of even non-metal fans. To flow through Ashen Hearts and to see Death just once would be my two highlights, but really this whole album brings an experience like no other. The riffs are incredible, the drumming is as good as it gets, and the vocals are loud and passionate, but not overwhelming. Ulcerate has a few great releases in their discography, but this is easily their hardest hitting album and their most accessible. Instead of feeling constant despair, you're going to be banging your head throughout the entire album, as it never slows down and is a thrilling experience throughout. Paranol wasn't instant love for me, but I think Sky 100 was the album that really sold me on this band. I've always been a massive shoegaze fan. Like, I've had multiple intense phases where I was strictly listening to My Bloody Valentine and Slowdive and literally nothing else. And I've also had phases where I listened to pretty much every shoegaze release that had a bit of popularity. But Sky 100 is the absolute most epic shoegaze album I've ever heard. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it takes a genre much past its dream pop and alternative rock roots and adds a sense of artistry to it. The experimental sounds and incredibly noisy production makes it something that's never been done before. It takes shoegaze and puts it on a whole other level in terms of scale and how grand it feels. Whenever I listen to tracks like Gold River and Evoke Me, I get totally absorbed in the dreamy atmosphere. In fact, I get crushed by the pure density of this album. I feel overwhelmed, but in a good way, because it just makes me so damn happy to listen to. When you listen to this, I strongly recommend you just take it in fully with no distractions, because it's truly an incredible experience.
I do a lot for the mentions. I spaz in other dimensions. But to take it to another level, my attraction came with a pension.
JPEG Mafia is probably my favorite rapper of all time. He definitely is right now, but maybe Prodigy gets that all-time spot. In fact, I made a whole video ranking every JPEG Mafia song. That just shows how much I love this dude. I wouldn't say I Lay Down My Life For You is his best album, but it feels like his most mature. It's not all over the place. It's concise and organized, even though it's extremely diverse. There's some heavy songs that would be classified as rap rock, with my favorites being I Scream This in the Mirror Before I Interact with Anyone and Vulgar Display of Power. These songs have incredible production, of course, especially the use of super polished electric guitar parts, and Peggy absolutely kills the vocal performances. There's classic experimental rap bangers like JPEG Ultra and Sin Miedo, which were just as good as you would expect from a classic Peggy song. But Peggy also gets his most mellow on this album, with powerful tracks like Either On or Off the Drugs and Don't Put Anything on the Bible. They can often be pretty depressing and self-loathing, which I love to see, and I think he executed them great. He didn't play it safe on this album, going in a ton of different directions and making it all sound so mature and passionate. Peggy is in his prime as a songwriter and a producer, and you can see his talents on full display on this album. Diamond Jubilee by Cindy Lee is one of the vibiest albums of the year. It's a 2-hour long lo-fi pop album, but it never once gets boring. It's an album you can put on when studying or just chilling at any time, as it puts you in an absolutely incredible headspace. I am a fan of hypnagogic pop music like this, or however you pronounce that genre. Artists like James Ferraro and Ariel Pink I absolutely love, just because they can make you feel like you're on another planet. Songs on Diamond Jubilee like Kingdom Come and If You Hear Me Crying are incredibly catchy, but also leave you thinking, is this even music made by humans? The whole experience feels alien-like. It blew my mind the first time I heard it, and whenever I revisit it, I'm still not fully convinced that Cindy Lee are humans. The production gives it this old radio sound. The whole album sounds like those lost art songs that show up every now and then that people go crazy over. It transports you to another time and place, and when you're there, you're entertained the whole time. I hope this album starts a wave of people trying to make similar sounding pop music, because I think making this style more accessible, similar to this album, can result in some of the coolest pop music you can imagine.
Leaning on the windowsill, you could write me someday, and I think you will. We could see the sadness as a gift and still.
Adrienne Lenker is one of the best singer-songwriters right now, and Bright Future absolutely proves that. It's maybe not as good as Songs or some of her Big Thief work, but it still captures what makes her such a special artist. Her ability to create emotions like feeling alone and longing for somebody is a rare talent, and she may just be the best at it. Songs like Free Treasure, Ruined, and one of the best songs of the year and her career, Sadness as a Gift, paint this picture of someone who's desperate for love and full of regrets. Adrienne is an incredible writer, creating deeply personal lines and telling stories that feel so genuine, but she's also an amazing guitarist. Some of the guitar work on here is so powerful and makes the lonely mood even more impactful, as well as her great vocals that just feel so raw and passionate. It just makes everything come together so well. At times I wish tracks like Candle Flame and Cell Phone Says were left off, but I still feel the raw emotion that Adrienne was trying to achieve on every track on this album. It flows well, it's consistent, and it's one of the most emotionally powerful albums of the year. I have always been a massive Phil Elverum fan. Some of his music has touched me on a deep level. The Glow Part 2, Mount Eerie, and A Crow Looked at Me were all albums I listened to a shit ton throughout high school, except maybe the last one because it's just too sad, and are some of my absolute favorite albums ever created. Not only because they were works that just stuck with me for a long period of time on an emotional level, but also just because they're phenomenal and have some of the most unique sounds you'll ever hear in the contemporary folk scene. But I'd argue Night Palace is just as good as some of those albums, if not better. Some of the tracks on here are just beautiful, non-metaphorical, Decolonization, I Need New Eyes, and the masterpiece that is I Walk invoke such emotion in me that is really only matched by the absolute peak of Phil's songwriting. It's also arguably his most experimental album, with weird sounding, almost trap beats, multiple instances of nature sounds, even more than usual for Phil. There's just a lot of interesting stuff on here, even for his standards, and they all work so well at setting the atmosphere for this album. I definitely need more time with this one, but in the future I wouldn't be surprised if I was putting this near the absolute top of Phil's incredible discography.
Tennis shoes cheaper than interviews when you half-ass, remember? Half-ass beginner, ain't no love in the inner way the fuck you might shiver.
Rich Axe Haitian by Mac Hammy is my absolute favorite rap album of 2024. As a massive fan of his work dating back to his early 2010 stuff, I had high hopes for this album, but every single expectation I had was shattered. It has arguably Mac's most diverse track list. It consists of bouncy dance rap songs like the title track, and a ton of uniquely produced bangers like Political and Same 24. The production on this album is among Mac's best, with every song sounding so polished and tight, and beautiful at times as well. It's clearly his most accessible album, which is why it got more popularity than any of his other releases, maybe except Pray for Haiti, but I definitely don't think it's a bad thing that it tends to be more easy on the ears, because it makes for some absolute bops to go along with the heavy political themes that Mac uses in his music. This is also one of his best rapping performances. Songs like Paid On and the absolute masterpiece of a collab with Black Thought that is Copy Cold. He just shows that he can rap with the absolute best of them. If you enjoy this album, which I assume most rap fans will, I heavily encourage you to listen to his earlier work, such as albums like The Gat and Haitian Body Odor, because they are just as memorable as this album. Matt Kami has been a top-tier rapper who brings in a sense of artistry that very few can do, and this album is one of his absolute best. Cool World by Chatpile was another one of my most anticipated albums of the year because I love their debut and their EPs. They have such a heavy and powerful sound that just overwhelms you with just pure agony. It's awesome. And Cool World was another example of 2024 really delivering with albums I was anticipating. It's actually insane how little albums disappointed me this year. The only major one I can think of was Still Praying by Westside Gunn. Was not feeling that. But other than that, Cool World is just one of many albums that completely matched and exceeded my expectations. I said their previous work was powerful. This one is just on a whole other level. The heavy and dissonant guitar riffs are just killer, and they send you into this apocalyptic and disturbing atmosphere, and once you're there, you get Ray Gun's insane screamy vocal performances. It's just an absolutely chaotic listen, yet everything feels so cohesive. Songs like Shame, Frownland, and my favorite song Mask are absolutely incredible and will have you bopping your head with absolute disgust. It uses sludge metal elements more often than their previous work, and it makes everything sound even more brutal and aggressive. I'd make the case this is one of the best sludge metal albums of all time, rivaling some of the best work from bands like Acid Bath and Neurosis. Chatpile captures exactly what I would imagine war sounds like, and it results in the best rock album of the year.
But
Imaginal Disc by Magdalena Bay is not only the best album of this year, it's the best of the 2020s so far, and I'd make a strong case it would be the best of the 2010s decade as well. To say I was excited for Imaginal Disc feels like an understatement. In fact, I don't think I've ever been this excited for an album in my entire life. Magdalena Bay is my favorite pop group of this generation by a mile. I first fell in love with them when I heard Killshot for the first time in 2022, and then their debut album came out and it became one of my favorite pop albums of that year. Ever since then, I've been listening to all their mixtapes and EPs, as well as Mercurial World, a pretty high amount. So when they dropped Death and Romance in May, I immediately couldn't wait for this one to come out, especially because I loved every other single, especially Image, which is my favorite song of the year. By the time August 23rd came around, I had already done about 5 entire discography listens and listened to every single a shit ton of times. And that night, at midnight, after months of waiting, I got one of the absolute best album listening experiences of my entire life. The atmosphere of every track felt like an absolute dream. I felt like I was leaving Earth and floating in space throughout the entire album, with incredible instrumental parts that made me ascend, and Mika's whispery and floaty vocals. I felt like I was in a constant trance, to the point that I didn't even notice my head was bopping for 50 minutes straight. All the singles, Watching TV, Cry For Me is so good, The Ballad of Matt and Mika, and literally every single song on this album are pretty much masterpieces, and it makes for a super cohesive and absolutely beautiful pop album, but the element that really makes it special is the production. I want to give an applause to Matt, Mika, and the entire production team, because I genuinely believe this might just be the best produced album of all time. No album has had every single production technique, every single synth, every single usage of keyboard, every single guitar part, every single bass line, and every single drum sound this phenomenal. It's oftentimes clean and ethereal, but it always develops into something dirty, and both of those are done equally as perfect. I can feel the amount of effort put into this album, and it makes it an absolute masterpiece not only because of its atmosphere, but also just because it slaps. I'm so glad this album got them more popularity, as this duo is one that everybody needs to look out for in the future, because this is only their second album, and it's already in contention for the greatest pop album of all time in my opinion. 2024 was a hell of a year for music, and these were my 25 favorite albums that came out this year. Obviously, this is just my opinion, but I hope you enjoyed this video even if you didn't always agree with my opinions. That's all, thanks, bye.